Hi, good afternoon. And not one who loves to publicly speak or even leave Brooklyn much, I do have to say that this exciting time is such an honor to be in the company of my community at this historic moment. Thank you so much for having me, because you know, if the truth is that Barack Obama got out there to run and win, what I think he's going to do for my generation of children that's coming up now is he's going to make it possible for them to fly. So that's where I come from today. Before I read from my memoir, which is a follow-up to the first memoir I did, I just wanted to talk a little bit about libraries and a little bit about my own writing and process, and explain that a lot of my writing life has been very internally focused. I've written one novel, but primarily I've written 2 memoirs and a lot of very, I guess what you would call confessional poetry. And I think, you know, there were critics, many times critics would have a lot to say about this sort of genre of writing. But what I knew for sure was that I came from a tradition, especially of women writers and especially of black women writers, who, because we didn't see ourselves on a public dais, we didn't see ourselves on a public stage, we began to take hold of our own lives, create our own mirrors, and tell our own stories, which is the relevance and the importance, I think, of doing memoir. I went to school in the very rarefied Upper East Side world of Manhattan, all private schools. I can tell you that the name my sister was called was Nappy-Headed Monkey, and the name that I was called is too vulgar to say in mixed company. And so it was a very lonely, isolating life, which is probably what led me along this trajectory. After that, I went to various schools, and even Howard was a very strange place for me to be. I was there for a very short period of time at the beginning of my college career because there was still even there so much breaking down along color lines, if not actual race lines, and it was very shocking for me to find out as a 15-year-old. And when I left, when I came back to New York to go to school, still kind of trying to find myself and find a mirror and find a voice, because everything I had read, I had read the poetry. My mother used to read to me Paul Laurence Dunbar, and we learned Langston Hughes. But aside from these 2 writers, I knew no such thing as a black poet, a black writer in the world. It did not exist. And so there's this one day, I was at Columbia University. I was an undergraduate student for a period there. It was pouring, and I went into the library to escape like the rain and this long break I had in between classes, because Columbia's way up in Harlem and I lived out in Brooklyn, so there was no going home, there was no dorm life. And I was just like kind of thumbing through things, looking, and I came across a book, which I think is still the seminal collection of poems by somebody who's Dudley Randall, the great, great publisher who founded Broadside Press in the 1960s, and many of our best poets were initially published by him. Sonia Sanchez, Hakeem Adabudi, who was then Don L. Lee. And he took this incredible collection of books that started with the Negro spirituals, and he took it all the way up to the people who were current then at the end of the 1960s. And I couldn't believe it. It was like I had this whole world. There was language that sounded like my language. There were thoughts that sounded like my thoughts. There was a rhythm, and I thought, I have walked into a world and had a world opened up for me, and all of a sudden I didn't feel like the freak of the week anymore. I was like, oh, there's other weirdos out here too. And then later on in my graduate career, I was a student at Bennington College in Vermont. Now, we're not talking about the bastion of diversity. And honestly, I will tell you, when I would be at Bennington in weather like this, it was really the whitest place I've ever seen in the world. It was very overwhelming. But I thought, at this point, I thought I had sort of had my sea legs, and I could, get out there and debate. And these guys would get up and they would start lecturing on T.S. Eliot, and folks who I didn't have enough. I didn't have enough standing to get in there. And my teacher, God rest his soul, my beloved Jason Schinder, looked at me, and Jason was very Jewish, and he's very proud of that. There's always this line, we always say to everybody, just stay Jewish, you'll be fine. And he looked at me and said, well, they can talk about what they know, you talk about what you know. It was incredible advice, and from that point, I just planned, like, this is where I'm from, this is who I'm from, and at that point, because I couldn't learn it necessarily in the workshops, and because I was a graduate student and could, to a large degree, create my own curriculum in the course of that 2-year program and doing my master's, which was primarily on the literature of black women, I read 150 books, and I learned then that sometimes the support is not going to be in the school, sometimes it's not going to be among your colleagues and the people you walk. Sometimes support comes from people who are 75, 100, 200 years dead. This is the importance of libraries. It houses the words, the spirit, the heart, the best of our tradition, the best of who we are. When my daughter was 5, it became a huge, I could almost cry to think of it. Just a huge thing. We had to go and get her library card. And now my little reader is so far ahead in her class. I looked at it, she was supposed to be at a certain point when she graduates 3rd grade in June. She's so well past, and I said, well, what do I do now? She said, well, just keep letting her read. And it was beautiful coming up here today. And I told her that she fell asleep in the car, as kids are prone to do. And I said, you need to wake up, we're in Tarrytown. And the whole light came. She said, I just read about Tarrytown in the Judy Blume book. And here it is, it's come to life. And this is what, gave her this whole realm. We deserve the whole world. We have a right to walk anywhere and to enter any place and to not be limited. We don't have to be our ancestors who couldn't enter libraries or read books or go to theater. We have a right to be in libraries, provide us with the vision if we don't have the dollars at that particular time especially. And if you can't get on a plane, what you can do is come to a library and discover a whole world out there. So that's what I hope for her. And I think, finally before I start to read, I want to say that on the 80th anniversary that we're celebrating of King's life, of his birth, I think that of what he wanted the most, right, was for us to always be able to walk fully into our humanity, to understand it, for it to be respected, for it to be honored among everybody. And I can't think of a better place where you could meet the breadth of the world in one building. You could learn stories from everywhere in one building. And in learning their stories and in coming to appreciate the stories of our fellow man and woman, I think we come to appreciate who we are and expand all of our humanities. That is the hope, I think, of Martin Luther King. And it is where Martin Luther King and libraries come together and why we have to keep standing for it and why we have to keep saying, yes, we can. So with that, I'm going to read from this book, and I'll give you a little bit. I had the bookmark in it too. Doesn't that always happen? You have the bookmark, you get all prepared, then you get up here and you lose it. So I'm going to just babble a little bit while I find my place again. This book, Nisa, would you bring Mama some water, please? She's got to be good for something, right? She doesn't pay rent.